We decide we want to be the masters of our own destiny. We want to decide what we do, when we do, how we want to do it. We think our plans are better than God's plans. And I think sometimes God actually says, okay, go for it. Let me know how it works out for you. You want to be in control of everything? You want to follow your own plans? You don't want to follow the plans I'm setting out for you? All right, have a good time. And sometimes I think he lets us go down that road. As I was trying to think of a good analogy for it, I kept coming back to canoeing. Now my guess is not many of you have canoed before. How many of you have canoed?
I can't.
Hey, good chunk of you, all right. Well, my dad loves to canoe. He loves the outdoors, loves to hunt, but he really loves to canoe. At one point, see, we were a family of 5, and we had 2 canoes. Why do you need 2 canoes? I don't know, but he loves canoes. There was a point where we actually had to throw our old couches out. We were moving into a new house, and my stepmom kept bugging him, you need to buy a new couch, you need to buy a new couch. He went out and bought a canoe before he bought a new couch. And still hadn't bought a couch. My stepmom had to threaten to bring the canoe into the house, turn it upside down for guests to sit on, because they didn't have a couch, and he'd gone and bought a canoe. That's how much he loves canoes. He loves canoeing. So we would canoe quite often as a family, and if you've ever canoed, you know that things work a little different in a canoe than they do in, say, a car, or for those of you who are licensely challenged, a bike, or a scooter, or a moped, or a skateboard, or whatever. When you get into a rough road, if you're driving, or in some other form of transportation, when you get in a rough road or things get troubled, you slow down. You want to slow down, you want to tap on your brakes, you want to make sure you have both hands on your wheel and you're controlling the steering. You want to make sure you can see the road and not hit things if it's dark or the road's rough or things like that. You slow down. In canoeing, it's actually the opposite. Most of the time we were in pretty still, a slow-moving water, because we had my 2 little sisters along with us. But occasionally you hit rapids. And when you hit rapids in a canoe, the thing you actually want to do is paddle faster. As you both get in, and when the rapids come up, you just say, okay, let's go. You don't worry so much about turning and steering and who's doing what and are you paddling on what side. You just both start paddling kind of as fast as you can go, because the water's going to move you and the water's going to take you. And if you actually try to slow down, if you try to stay in control, if you try to keep your pace back to what it normally is, your canoe will go sideways. And it's not like a whitewater raft, where if you have water come up over, it's no big deal, it flows out, or if you turn around and go backward, and it's all funny. If a canoe, even in small rapids, you go sideways, you go over. And your canoe is not inflated, and so it sinks. And it causes all sorts of trouble, and you end up wet and miserable. And if you canoed in a lot of places we canoed, there are water moccasins and deadly snakes and all that kind of stuff. So you do not, under any circumstances, want to go sideways because you tip. Ultimately, you want to end up paddling with the river. When you hit those rapids, you want to paddle faster. When it comes to God's plans in our life, that's what we need to do. We need to consider that we're canoeing. That God has a plan, He has a direction, He has a place He wants us to go. And instead of trying to back paddle, instead of trying to turn and do our own things and stay in control, follow our own plans, we need to paddle with it. But sometimes I think God says, okay, you know what, you're in control, you want to do it, go for it. And we try to slow down, and we try to take control, we end up going sideways, we end up being hurt, we end up being cold, wet, miserable, and our whole world gets turned upside down. God is God. He's going to get His plan done. He gets His plan done with Joseph. I think He got His plan done all sorts of other ways. If you don't know the story of Joseph, ultimately, Joseph gets sent down to Egypt, as we kind of finished in that chapter. He becomes really high up in Potiphar's house. He's basically in charge of the whole house. Potiphar's wife tries to, I don't know if you could say rape him, at least seduce him. And he says no, because he's a man of character. Potiphar's wife basically pretends like it actually happened and gets him thrown in jail. He becomes in charge of the whole jail. And things turn out so he eventually ends up in charge of all of Egypt. That was ultimately God's plan. God is God. He didn't need the brothers to accomplish that plan, but He probably could have used it. Ultimately, we find at the end of the story is the brothers end up miserable. Their life has been turned upside down. There's extreme famine in the land. They're all starving. They end up having to go down to Egypt, because Egypt is the only place with grain. Because of Joseph and God using Joseph, Egypt is able to have all this grain and able to be the only place around that has any food. And so Joseph's brothers, they wanted their own plan, their own way, their own direction, their own path. God said, sure, fine, go for it. They went sideways, They get tipped upside down, they end up miserable. They end up essentially just about destroyed. Because God is ultimately going to fulfill his plan. And he does, with Joseph ruling over his brothers. Flip over to chapter 45 in Genesis real quick, just to give you a little taste of how the story ends. Joseph has been put in charge basically at this point of all of Egypt. His brothers show up. They're basically having to bow down to him. They're scared for their lives. Just to give you a little contrast of following God's plan versus following your own. 45, I'm going to read 1 through 11. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." Because he's had his brothers in. Brothers don't even recognize him because he's basically king of Egypt. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" So it's been a long time at this point. But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. They've just realized that the brother that they basically tried to kill, they sold off into slavery, is now in charge of the greatest kingdom on earth at this point. But definitely their land, and they're sitting right in front of them. He could have them all killed at a moment's notice. Verse 4, Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save the lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 there will be not plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his empire, household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, and your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household, all who belong to you, will be destitute.'" So God said to his brothers, you know what, that's your plan, that's what you want to do. You could have been a part of the plan, could have been part of God's full blessing. That's the way you want to do it, that's fine. You get to go sideways, you get to have your world flipped upside down, you get to starve, you get to go groveling back to the brother you tried to kill. Be completely humiliated and humbled as your littlest brother is charged with the most powerful kingdom in the world. That's where ultimately they ended up. God fulfilled his plan. He had Joseph be ruler. He could have done it a bunch of different ways, and I think a lot of times in our own lives, that's the option we're given. We could join with God's plan, we could head down that river, we could have a great time, or we can try to do our own thing and have our whole world flipped upside down. Have things go miserable, go horrible, continue to go down the road, but we so want that type of control. We only realize that one side of the story. That once Elisa figured out that there was more to it, she said, okay, here's how things are going. How many of you would actually have that courage, that honesty, to take that look? To own up to your flaws, to acknowledge our pride, our desire to accomplish our own plans? Or would you just keep going around and trying to take everybody around you down a notch or two? So it lifts yourself up a little bit. So you feel a little bit better, and all those people you think are getting favored come down in your eyes a little bit. Do you ever feel like the whole world's against you? Like everything just seems to be falling apart, and you can't keep your head above water, and you're trying, and it just seems like everything hits you all at once? Maybe it's time to stop and start asking some of those questions. Am I really seeking after God's plan, or am I trying to be in control? Am I trying to paddle backwards? Am I trying to slow down rather than go where God is going, and flow where God is flowing, and find out where God is really moving, and join in and go with it? Because if not, if you want to do your own thing, I really think sometimes God, he takes control and he says, no, I'm not going to let you do that, I want to help you out. Other times I think God says, if that's what you really want, then I'm going to let you have it. I'm going to let you have the full consequences of your actions. I'm going to let you follow your own plans, and you can see where that leads you. Let's pray.